Welcome to Iberia, I am Wolf. With a new historical total war on the horizon, one question must be asked: what is the future of historical total war? On my last total war video, I stated that historical total war, as we know it, is dead. But if that is so, what will the future historical total wars look like? To answer this question, I'll take a look at the last few titles and try to put together a list of features that we can expect to see in the future. So let's dive in. Historical total war will surely continue. We know this because there are different teams working on different games spread across different studios. According to their Three Kingdoms assassination video, there are currently 4 total war teams: Historical, Three Kingdoms, Saga and Fantasy. It is likely that the Fantasy team joined the other teams after Warhammer 3, unless there's a new Fantasy title in the works. Lord of the Rings. With this out of the way, we can now start imagining how the next historical total war will be. The most relevant games as far as historical goes are Thrones of Britannia, the last true historical title, and Three Kingdoms. Thrones was a mixed bag, but truth is it's mechanically sound with interesting design choices, politics and characters. But it does have 2 major flaws. It's the overly large map taking many turns to get an army anywhere relevant, and the lack of faction variety that is a result of the scope of the game. And if you think that Three Kingdoms is not a historical total war, consider this. It's set on a real place, real time period, and it depicts real characters and history-inspired events. And as far as I'm concerned, that's historical. If we also look at Rome 2, Attila, Warhammer, and Troy, we can have a good guess at which features CA is promoting, developing, and improving. So what might we see in the next historical total war? Diplomacy and resources. In my opinion, Three Kingdoms had the best diplomacy any total war title has ever seen. It allowed the trading of food, exchanging territories came back, there were coalitions trading items, and it allowed the player to see how likely the other faction was to accept with a simple number. While a number breaks immersion, it's extremely helpful. Later, Troy used the traditional diplomacy system, but it allowed the trading of resources as well. I believe both these systems will be implemented on the next total war. The resources will be adjusted to the time period, and this system will work perfectly for both medieval, Renaissance, and especially the Victorian period. Politics. I believe politics will be a mix between Rome 2 and Attila. It depends on the time period. For an Empire game, they have to go with different political parties like in Rome 2, representing different political ideologies, but with the office system of Attila for ministers, prime ministers, etc., allowing for different political systems to be implemented and for characters to do a myriad of actions. For a medieval game, where the feudal system was the norm, I believe the same could be implemented, but with the political parties being families with their respective family trees. Thrones of Britannia then added the estate system, where you could give an estate to a certain character, giving them and the faction a certain bonus. And Attila's office system would work wonders here as well. You could have court positions, knights, etc. Characters. Characters have been getting more and more attention since Warhammer, culminating in Three Kingdoms. I believe characters will be able to equip items and will have an RPG-like development system. I'd like them to use a trait system like in Rome 1, where a character will develop by doing certain actions on the campaign or battlefield. For example, if the character is in a town with an inn and no education buildings, he might become a drunk. If you want a particularly bloody battle, he might get the bloody traits. We've seen this in Warhammer 2 at least. While it has been removed from Three Kingdoms, we might come to see it again. Character units also need to be spoken of, and I think they will have single entity generals, but this will likely be an option. I can imagine characters like Joan of Arc, Richard the Lionheart, Charlemagne being single entities in a heroes mode and full knight retinues in a records mode. Recruitment. Recruitment hasn't been consistent in the last few titles, but if the next title is Medieval 3, we might get something like Three Kingdoms but improved. Feudal lords would often have retinues, and Three Kingdoms system would really work for that. We might even end up seeing this system representing the character retinues mixed with Thrones faction unit pool and the mustering mechanic where units take a few turns to muster after being recruited. That would represent the levied men. For an Empire-based game, I believe Thrones system is what makes the most sense, where you have the faction unit pool that replenishes over time. And perhaps all this should be tied with the population system. Population. Population is quite essential in Total War, and it took years since Medieval 2 for us to see it return. Three Kingdoms has a population system, but it's just a number that messes with public order and tax revenue. Population should dictate the amount of men you can muster for your armies as well as your tax base and squalor. And that's why the next Total War will have a population system. The way it is implemented is anyone's guess. If it is a Medieval 3, then it'll probably be in Rome 1's fashion, or maybe I'm just being too optimistic. Settlements. I wish they'd go back to Rome 1 or Medieval 2 for this one, but quite frankly, I doubt it. I believe that the settlements will look like they do in any modern Total War game. The map will be divided into provinces and provinces into smaller regions. Each province has a main city and the other regions a smaller settlement. All of these will have limited build slots. If we get an Empire game, they might go back in time and add the emerging towns of Empire 1, but honestly, I wouldn't hold my breath. However, if we get a medieval game, it's likely they add the distinction between cities and castles. Factions. Just like in Three Kingdoms, I believe that faction-specific mechanics are here to stay. Personally, I feel that all factions should have access to the same mechanics so I can use the same mechanics in different geopolitical situations. But it seems to me that people enjoyed this and that it was a successful introduction to the franchise. Naval battles. Yes, this. Especially if it's an Empire game or they're making a new engine. It's simply mandatory that naval battles get a reappearance. It is one of Three Kingdoms' criticisms. Where are the naval battles? And if they do add this one, I'm assuming they'll play like an improved version of Attila or Empire. These are the features I think have a high chance to be ported over to the next historical Total War, and the good news is that there's a lot of room for all these features to interact. For example, the estate and retinue systems for a Medieval 3 game. If a character has an estate, they might have a larger or better retinue. My hopes for any major changes to the formula are, quite frankly, dead. But if we look at Three Kingdoms with all its differences from previous historical titles, it shows us that Creative Assembly is willing to innovate, even if not in the formula itself. They were willing to introduce new features like faction-specific mechanics and to massively overhaul others like the characters and diplomacy. In short, they took a risk. As such, despite all the features I spoke above, it's quite possible that some of those areas will be just massively overhauled. Perhaps the Call of Duty-fication of Total War is not quite true. So what was the point of all this? The point is that historical Total War as we know it, it is dead, but not gone. It has transformed into something else. Empire marked the transition of a Total War era, from the old to the modern. It was a transition game. Three Kingdoms is the transition from the modern to the future of Total War, and the next historical title will set the standard for all future titles. I am but trying to give you a glimpse of what that could be. Whether this change is good or bad remains to be seen. And me, I will just cautiously wait for this new title. What features do you think the next historical Total War will have? Do you think it'll be a major step up or down for the franchise? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like, subscribing, or watching one of the videos on your screen right now. Stay wonderful, I've been Wolf, and I'll see you next time.